Good evening, my name is Rebecca Bardsley. I will be doing a presentation on two different perspectives of psychology. I will be talking about the various persons who have made discoveries on behaviourism and biopsychology, about the similarities and differences between the two. I will talk about the applications of both on contemporary issues, and I will also talk about my evaluations of the theorists and the applications. The beginnings of behaviourism were first discovered by Ivan Pavlov in 1897. Pavlov was a Russian physiologist who discovered classical conditioning whilst conducting the experiment on the dog's digestive system, wherein Pavlov noted that the dogs salivated when presented with food. Pavlov's dog experiment is widely known in the psychology field. When Pavlov noticed the dog's reaction to food, he produced the idea of introducing a neutral stimulus to see if he could elicit the same response without food. So every time the dogs were presented food, he rang a bell. The dogs then started to expect food every time the bell rang, which caused the dogs to salivate. He then started to ring the bell with no presentation of food to see if he could cause the dogs to salivate. The dogs did react and salivate without food, and therefore Pavlov's experiment was a success. Pavlov's experiment helped make advancements in the psychology field. Neutral stimulus refers to an item or action that causes no response or reaction from the subject. Unconditioned stimulus is an item or action that naturally elicits a response or reaction from the subject. This is a reaction that is not learned or taught. Conditioned stimulus is a previously neutral item or action that now elicits a response or reaction. This is an item or action that has been taught to cause a reaction. Conditioned response is a taught response and conditioned stimulus. This is where they now react to a neutral stimulus as the subject has been taught to react. Unconditioned response. This is an automatic response to an unconditioned stimulus. This has not been taught or learned. Temporal contiguity. The law of temporal contiguity is the time in between the conditioning and reconditioning phase. It was discovered when Pavlov realised that if too much time passed between the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus, association or learning will not happen. Unconditioning through experimental extinction. Through the experiment, it was realised that if the bell was rung without food, the salivation response was weakening and eventually disappeared. This is when the conditioned stimulus was repeatedly used without the unconditioned stimulus being present. Spontaneous recovery. This is where a response that was thought to have disappeared makes a brief reappearance. Though the reaction may have faded, it is not completely forgotten. Generalization is a reaction to something similar to the initial stimulus. This was discovered when some sounds like that of a bell would cause a reaction from the dogs. Though not as strong as reaction would be from using a bell, there are still similar responses. In my evaluation of Pavlov's discovery of classical conditioning was a great breakthrough in understanding the mind and how it works. Even though Pavlov's dog's experiment was very insightful in understanding conditioned reflexes, his experiment was very limited to a set response. The ability to have free will and choices were taken away from the subjects. The results from the experiment show that the effects of classical conditioning are not 100% guaranteed to last, as you would have to do top-up training. Pavlov's experiments were conducted on animals and therefore cannot accurately reflect how a human mind would act. John Watson's and Rosalie Rayner's experiments were highly controversial and frowned upon in the psychological world, even though they did make an impact on the understanding of how conditioning worked, which brought to light the unethical and immoral practices of their experiment, such as using a fear-inducing stimulus on a young child. Watson and Rayner had their mother's permission to conduct the experiment on the child, named Sir Albert. They wanted to test if phobias are a natural response or if little Albert can be conditioned to have phobias. Also, they wanted to see if conditioning is restricted to animals and if conditioning can be used on a human subject. Albert was presented with an array of animals, but was particularly drawn to the white rat, as he had no fear towards the rat. That was the baseline of his reaction to the rat. The positive stimulus was therefore his reaction to the white rat. Albert disliked or feared loud noises, so this was to be a negative stimulus to be used in conditioning. After the baseline was recorded, they began the conditioning sessions. When they presented the rat to Albert on 7 occasions, followed by the loud noise, he would react with fear and shying away. After the final conditioning, they presented the rat with no loud noise, and Albert would immediately burst into tears and try to crawl away. Thus, it still had fear of the rat, which led to Watson to make his conclusion that this was evidence of fear conditioning. Watson and Rayner conducted these experiments to test out Pavlov's conditioning theory and to see if it also applied to humans. Besides discovering that Pavlov's theory does indeed also apply to humans as well as dogs, it also proved that generalization theory and extinction theory. So if Albert were to see anything that resembled or held aspects like that of the white rat, he would react negatively. Proving generalization. For extinction theory, Albert showed to have less of a reaction when presented with white rats or items or animals with similarities to that of the rat. He would have to freshen up his fear reaction by keeping on top of the conditioning. His mother pulled Albert from the experiment before they could complete their full findings. What they wanted to test was if they could reverse the effects of the conditioning. In my evaluation of Watson's and Rayner's experiment on little Albert has helped expand on Pavlov's theory. It was discovered that classical conditioning will work on children as well as animals. The experiment has moved away from the theory and has applied evidence-based methods to gather results. The little Albert experiment was seen to be morally wrong, and I agree with that it was. The experiment has helped understand how phobias can develop from trauma responses, has helped in the development of desensitivity training against phobias. Skinner developed the operant theory, where he studies positive and negative reinforcement. He believed that positive behaviours that were rewarded would be repeated, whilst negative behaviours were punished. They would not be repeated. He also created a Skinner box to study live organisms' behaviours. The box had 2 levers, one for food and another would give an electric shock. He also believed that you could teach good behaviour to the organism he studied. Skinner produced the idea of reinforcement schedules: fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, and variable interval. He found that the variable ratio was the most productive and is less likely to be forgotten. Considered the father of behaviourism, the consequence of behaviour will determine if it happens again. Operant conditioning is the reinforcement of positive behaviour and negative behaviour. Skinner used mice and other small animals in his experiments to see if he could train these specimens by reinforcing these behaviours with rewards. Negative behaviour is not reinforced through punishment. It is instead reinforced through removing the object that has caused this unpleasant behaviour. Skinner believed that such training could also be used on children, but others worried that this would only cause shallow learning rather than deep understanding of a subject. Other psychologists worried that Skinner's theories were an oversimplification of behaviours, but Skinner managed to calm their worries by saying that positive reinforcement should only be used when rewarding effort and not necessarily the result. Also, positive reinforcement should not be used all the time, as some children may not respond to positive reinforcement. This is when negative reinforcement will need to be used. The reward system for use positive reinforcement is not meant to be a long-term solution, but a learning aid in how to learn positive behaviours and train out bad behaviours. In my evaluation of operant conditioning, the experiment was using an evidence-based method that showed and collated responses to a reward and punishment system. The Skinner box was able to measure a rat's response to a reinforced reward or a punishment, help determine cause and effect. As Skinner's experiment was conducted on animals, so cannot accurately reflect how a human would react. As a result of how operant conditioning can positively or negatively affect a person's behaviour, positive operant conditioning can be used in a generalised way. The reward system that Skinner devised from his experiments can be used in real-life settings. Assumptions of behaviourism in psychology: that we are all born as blank slates and that it is our environment that teaches us how to behave, that all behaviour can be taught, and that inherited traits can be overwritten. that environmental factors affect our behaviours, that humans can be conditioned like animals, that to study behaviour, science-based experiments should be performed to measure responses more accurately. In my evaluation of behaviourism, studying different behaviours and how people react in different environments helps us understand cause and effects. The science experiments that Pavlov, Watson and Rayner and Skinner have carried out have helped to provide insights into how conditioning can have negative or positive results. Their theories have helped in the development of psychology. Even though their theories and experiments have given us great insight, I believe that they have their limits. The experiments were mainly conducted on animals, which do not always give the most accurate responses, and the animals cannot verbalise their responses. The experiments were performed in a controlled setting, so the responses to these experiments was also controlled, as the subject was influenced by their setting. Before biopsychology was first studied, it was philosophers that got people wondering about how the mind and body work together, how the mind affects the body. Aristotle, Hippocrates, and Plato were the first to think of how the hearts affect the mind and where the mind is located. This spurred on the study of how the brain can affect this physiology of the body. It was René Descartes and Leonardo da Vinci that first thought of how the nervous system can affect the muscle responses. Phrenology of pseudoscience brought forth the idea that bumps on the skull affect parts of the brain. This helped bring the study of the brain into modern science. Each of the different lobes of the brain are responsible for distinct functions within the body. The nervous system is a big part of what connects the brain to the body and helps signals throughout. The brain is also made up of neurotransmitters that carry information to neurons and send chemical messages throughout the body. Chemicals such as dopamine that can be responsible for Parkinson's disease or psychological disorders such as schizophrenia. Donald Hebb was an influential figure of neuropsychology in the 20th century. His research has helped the development of neuroscience as well as helping to be a founder of psychobiology. He became interested in psychology when he attended McGill University, where he met Sigmund Freud and Karl Lashley. He studied a master's degree in psychology. His thesis was about the perception of brightness in the sizes of rats and a correlation between the two. Later in Hebb's career, he worked as a research assistant to neurosurgeon Walter G. Penfield, who was studying nerve damage in patients with brain injuries. He would then move on to studying behaviour in primates with Lashley. After spending 5 years with Lashley, he would return home to write the famous works, The Organisation of Behaviour, 1948. This book contains his research on emotions, memory, thinking and perception. It is a study of human and animals' behaviour through biology, and discusses how their behaviour is attributed to brain activity and biology. Hebb's theories resulted from observations and clinical studies. Behaviourists are fully against Hebb's theories as it goes against their own ideas. In my evaluation of Hebb's studies, he uses his knowledge of the brain to study how emotions, perception and memory are affected by the brain. Hebbs uses scientific knowledge and experience to support his research and theories. He has extensively studied both animal and human behaviour. Assumptions of biopsychology. Genes determine our behaviour. Brain functions are localised. Neurochemicals are the basis of behaviour. Animals and humans are similar, therefore research can be conducted on both. Biopsychologists state that psychology should be seen and treated as a science. How we think or how we behave is linked to our biology and genes. How we behave can be inherited. In my evaluation of biopsychology can be shown using CAT scans, PET scans and EEGs by mapping out the brain and showing how changes to the brain can affect a person's behaviour. Studying the different lobes of the brain and seeing how they affect a person's ability to function. Studying the genetics of twins has helped prove that genes do have a major impact on a person's behaviour. Biopsychology is a highly scientific method of psychology. It can be objective and any experiment can be standardised. Individual case studies can be difficult to generalise, and differing results may be specific to the subject. Nature versus nurture. There's an ongoing argument between psychologists about nature versus nurture. There are those psychologists that believe that it is down to our genes to decide on our innate behaviour. It is a part of evolution, so therefore our instincts and behaviours are passed down from our parents. There are also some genetic diseases that can affect a person's behaviour, such as Alzheimer's, that can alter a person's personality later in life. There's also proof that nature, the environment that the person grows up in, can affect a person's personality and behaviour. If a child is brought up in a violent environment, the child is more likely to have violent tendencies. If the same child is brought up in, say please and thank yous in a more modest background, they are more likely to have a more genteel behaviour. But it's a combination of both nature versus nurture that can affect a child's personality as it grows up. Similarities. Behaviourists and biopsychologists both study psychology using a scientific method. Results from both sides have had a positive impact on psychology as well as drug therapy. Only relies on the scientific side and ignores the internal and mental processes. Differences. Studies on behaviourism relies heavily on animal experiments. Animal and human anatomies are different. Behaviourism studies conditioning and nurturing of a subject, whilst biopsychology studies genetics and biology. Behaviourism takes into consideration the changing surroundings of its subjects. Biopsychologists focus solely on the study and development of the human brain, does not take into consideration mental processes. The application of behaviourism in contemporary issues has helped with contemporary issues within the mental health sector. By using conditioning in a therapy setting, a psychologist can help to reduce a patient's fear or phobia. Conditioning has also had positive impact on treating a patient's addiction. Behaviourism is not a foolproof treatment that has a 100% success rate, but it is a tool to be used in helping treat patients. Consistent reapplication of conditioning treatment will help refresh the effects of conditioning treatment have. Behaviourism has also helped highlight other mental health issues such as anxiety and depression, helping patients to adopt healthier lifestyles that will help with mental health issues. The application of behaviourism has been effective in the workplace and education because it rewards its employees, faculty or students. By rewarding those, they adopt a more positive mindset and work ethic. The negative side is that it can become an expectation that if they stop receiving rewards, their work ethic can deteriorate and slow down progress. Computed axial application to contemporary issues, biopsychology. Computed axial tomography scans are detailed images of the brain that look at any abnormalities or injuries to the brain which can affect the mental health of the patient. These images help identify any changes that can contribute to psychological symptoms. Electroencephalograms monitor electrical signals in the brain. It is non-invasive application that detect changes to a patient's brainwaves and look at different patterns caused by different mental health conditions. Positron emission tomography measure metabolic processes from using a medication, stimuli and therapeutic interventions. By using any one of these scans, we can study the patient's brain to understand what has caused a change to a patient's behaviour. It could be genetic disorder, an imbalance of hormones, abnormalities such as a tumour, or an injury such as a concussion. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.